It was 3:14 in the morning, the kind of dead silence where the only thing you can hear is the blood rushing in your ears. But on the glowing screen of my phone, I was watching a crime in progress that was so brazen, so incredibly arrogant, it almost didn't feel real. There, grainy but unmistakable in the infrared light of my security feed, was the president of the Oak Haven Community Board, sneaking across my driveway with a pair of heavy-duty bolt cutters that looked like they belonged on a construction site, not in the manicured hands of a woman who wore silk scarves to check the mail. She was inching toward my charging station, the metal jaws of the tool gleaming in the moonlight, and she was about to sever the lifeline to my car, the same woman who drives a Lucid Air that costs more than my entire college education. The same woman who has been making my life a living hell for 6 months with petty fines and passive-aggressive notes. As I watched her clamp down on the thick copper cable, destroying $300 of equipment in a single snap, I didn't feel anger, not exactly. I felt a cold, hard clarity. Because what she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly understand from her ivory tower up the street, is that she wasn't just messing with a neighbor, she was messing with Lucas, a man who has spent 22 years as a master electrician, a man who understands that when you cut a wire, you don't just stop the flow of power, you create a hazard, and sometimes, if you're not careful, that hazard blows up right in your face. I sat there in the dark, listening to the crunch of gravel as she walked away, carrying my property like a trophy, and I realized that this wasn't just about a charging cable anymore. It was about to be a war. Let me back up a bit so you understand the voltage running through this situation. My name is Lucas, and after a divorce that left me with more emotional baggage than furniture, I bought a fixer-upper in Oak Haven Heights because I needed a garage, a sanctuary where I could work with my hands and rebuild my life alongside my teenage daughter, Maya. I drive a beat-up Chevy Bolt. It's not flashy, it's not sexy, but it's practical, just like me, and installing my own Level 2 charger was a point of pride, a father-daughter project where I taught Maya the beauty of a perfectly grounded circuit. But then came Patricia, the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood, a real estate mogul who looked at my work van and my modest car and decided I was a stain on her pristine property values, a woman who weaponized the HOA bylaws like a sniper rifle. The harassment started slow, a fine for unsightly equipment here, a citation for a commercial vehicle there, even though my van was parked in my own driveway. And the hypocrisy was so thick you could choke on it, because while she was writing me up for trying to save money on gas, she was driving that silent, six-figure electric beast, engaging in the kind of cognitive dissonance that only the truly entitled can manage. The morning after the theft, I walked over to her house at 7 a.m., my heart hammering against my ribs, and when she opened the door in a plush robe, holding a mug of coffee that smelled like it cost $20 a pound, she looked at me with this practiced, pitying smile. "Good morning, Lucas," she said, stretching my name out like it was a bad word. And when I held up my phone and showed her the video of her committing a felony in her pajamas, she didn't flinch, she didn't apologize, she looked me dead in the eye and said she was conducting a safety inspection to remove hazardous, unauthorized equipment. I stood there, stunned by the sheer audacity of it, watching her gaslight me in real time, claiming she stole my property for my own good. And that's when I knew the system wasn't just broken, it was rigged. I took my evidence to the police station, thinking a video of a theft was a slam dunk. But Sergeant Miller, a guy with the same country club jawline as Patricia, looked at the footage, looked at me, and asked if I really wanted to escalate a neighbor dispute, essentially telling me that property rights only matter if you live in the big house on the hill, not the fixer-upper at the bottom. He refused to file a report, refused to look at the receipts, and sent me home with a pat on the head and a warning to play nice. But he made a mistake, a critical error in judgment, because he assumed I was powerless. He didn't know that electricians are trained to troubleshoot, to trace a fault back to the source, and my ex-wife, God bless her sharp strategic mind, told me on the phone that night, "Stop looking at the symptoms, Lucas, look at the grid, find where the power is coming from." And she was right. I started watching Patricia, not with anger, but with precision, and I noticed something strange. Every night she would drive that Lucid Air down to the community center, a building funded by our tax dollars, and plug into the external outlet, stealing public electricity to charge her private luxury car. I started snapping photos, time-stamped, geotagged, building a dossier of petty theft that was ironic considering she had cut my cable for safety. But as I dug deeper, the rot went so much further than a few stolen kilowatts. Suddenly, violation notices started papering the neighborhood like snow, hitting the Kapoors for their prayer flags, hitting Sarah across the street for her kids' sidewalk chalk, targeting every single household that wasn't white, wealthy, or willing to kiss Patricia's ring. It was a pattern, a circuit diagram of discrimination, and when I called up an old buddy of mine, Officer Ramirez from the City Code Enforcement, a guy who actually cares about the law, we sat down in a diner, and he slid a folder across the table that made my stomach drop. "She's filed 40 complaints in 2 months," Ramirez whispered, "and 90% of them are against minorities." But then he dropped the bomb, the twist that made me laugh out loud in that crowded diner. Patricia, the woman terrorizing me about permits, had never pulled a single permit for her own high-voltage charger. Her entire setup was illegal, dangerous, and completely off the books. We realized then that we weren't dealing with a grumpy neighbor. We were dealing with a predator, a woman who was using the Oak Haven Community Board as a weapon to drive people out. And as I looked at the terrified faces of my neighbors, people like Elena Gomez, who was sobbing because Patricia had fabricated an eviction notice claiming her lease was invalid, I felt a shift inside me. This wasn't about getting my cable back anymore. This was about justice. It was about standing up for the Jeffersons, for the Kapoors, for Elena, and for my daughter. So we decided to set a trap, not just a physical one, but a legal, moral, and technological trap that would bring the whole corrupt empire crashing down. Maya, my brilliant 16-year-old, started compiling a database, cross-referencing every fine with the race of the homeowner and the date of the offense, creating a visual map of hatred that was undeniable, while Mrs. Sato, a retired prosecutor who lived quietly 3 doors down, dusted off her briefcase and started looking at the money. We were assembling a team, an Avengers squad of suburban outcasts, and while Patricia sat in her mansion thinking she was untouchable, thinking she had crushed us into submission, she had no idea that we were already cutting the power to her throne, wire by wire. The air in my garage was thick with the smell of soldering iron smoke and nervous energy as our little resistance cell gathered for what felt like a war council, surrounded by half-finished projects and spools of wire. Mrs. Sato stood at the head of my workbench, spreading out documents that looked boring to the naked eye, but were actually lethal weapons in paper form, revealing that Patricia wasn't just a bigot, she was a crook on an industrial scale. "It's a closed loop," Mrs. Sato explained, her voice trembling with the thrill of the hunt, pointing to a clause buried deep in the original Oak Haven charter that gave the management company the right of first refusal on any home sale. A company that we discovered was a shell corporation owned entirely by Patricia herself. The room went silent as the implication hit us like a sledgehammer. She wasn't just harassing the Kapoors and Elena Gomez because she hated them, though she clearly did. She was terrorizing them into selling their homes cheap so she could buy them through her shell company, flip them, and pocket the equity, a scheme so diabolical it turned neighborly disputes into organized racketeering. We calculated the numbers, scratching them out on a notepad, and realized she had stolen nearly $4 million in equity from families she had forced out over the last 3 years, essentially running an ethnic cleansing operation for profit, reading human lives like assets to be liquidated. As we sat there, the weight of it crushing us, Leo Vance, an investigative journalist I'd tipped off, leaned against my tool chest, his eyes wide, saying, "This isn't a story, Lucas. This is a Netflix documentary waiting to happen." And he began plotting the media rollout, a 3-part expose designed to destroy her reputation before the handcuffs even clicked. But Patricia, sensing she was losing control, began to spiral, launching a scorched earth campaign that was terrifying to watch. She called ICE on the Kapoors, claiming they were undocumented. She filed a lien against Mrs. Sato's paid-off house for imaginary fines. And she even sent the fire department to my house claiming they smelled burning chemicals, trying to swap me with firefighters. It was psychological warfare, plain and simple. And when Elena Gomez came to my door, clutching her children, terrified because Patricia had threatened to have her arrested for trespassing in her own rental, I knew we couldn't wait for the slow wheels of bureaucracy to turn. We needed to force her hand. We needed to make her commit a crime so undeniable, so public, that even her corrupt friends at the police station couldn't look away. I went back to my workbench and built the bait, a charging cable that looked identical to the one she stole. But inside the rubber casing, I embedded a GPS tracker, a cellular transmitter, and a current monitor that would alert me the second electricity started flowing through it. It was a piece of tech worthy of a spy movie, spliced together with duct tape and desperation, and I laid it out on my driveway like a slice of cheese in a mousetrap, knowing that Patricia's greed and her absolute belief in her own immunity would be her undoing. The tension in the neighborhood was electric, palpable, like the heavy atmosphere before a thunderstorm. We held a secret meeting at the community center, not the official one, but a gathering of the victims, and for the first time, people who had been hiding in their homes, afraid to make eye contact, stood up and shared their stories, realizing they weren't alone, realizing that their shame belonged to Patricia, not to them. Maya projected her data on the wall, a digital tapestry of harassment that showed 89% of Patricia's citations targeted non-white residents. And as the numbers glowed in the dim room, I saw the fear in my neighbor's eyes turn into something harder, something stronger, resolve. We knew the annual board election was coming up in 48 hours, and Leo Vance was set to drop his article the morning of the vote. But we needed the arrest to happen first. We needed the visual of the tyrant falling to really break the spell she had cast over Oakhaven Heights. The night of the trap, I sat in my darkened living room, staring at the monitor, my heart doing gymnastics in my chest, surrounded by Mrs. Sato, Leo, and Maya, all of us holding our breath as the clock ticked past 2 a.m. Then, a motion alert pinged on my phone, loud as a gunshot in the quiet house. And there she was, Patricia, dressed in black like a cartoon villain, creeping across my lawn with those damn bolt cutters again, looking around with a paranoia that was almost manic. She reached the cable, and I whispered, "Come on, take it, seal your fate." And as the blades bit into the copper, my phone lit up like a Christmas tree. GPS active, current severed, trap sprung. But she didn't run, she didn't hide. She looked directly into the camera lens, fully illuminated by the motion sensor floodlights that blinded her, and she smiled, a chilling, dead-eyed smirk that said, "I own this town, and I own you." She dragged the cable back to her garage, unaware that she was dragging a federal beacon, unaware that Mrs. Sato had already secured emergency injunctions freezing her assets, and unaware that I was on the phone with the state police, bypassing the local corrupt cops entirely. The stage was set, the players were in position, and as the sun began to rise over Oakhaven, the false peace of the suburbs was about to be shattered by the sound of justice coming home. The morning sun hit the pavement, but the real heat was coming from the convoy of state police cruisers rolling silently into Oakhaven Heights, bypassing the local precinct entirely because Mrs. Sato had gone over their heads to the FBI and the state attorney general. I watched from my window as the GPS signal on my laptop pulsed, showing my stolen cable was currently plugged into Patricia's Lucid Air inside her garage, literally stealing electricity while broadcasting her location to law enforcement with pinpoint accuracy. When the officers pounded on her door, the sound echoed like a gavel strike, bringing neighbors out onto their lawns, cups of coffee forgotten in their hands, as Patricia was dragged out in handcuffs, screaming about knowing the mayor, screaming about lawsuits, screaming until the heavy door of the cruiser slammed shut, cutting off her tirade. But the arrest was just the opening act. The real show was Leo Vance's article hitting the internet at the exact same moment, titled "The Suburban Dictator: How One Woman Monetized Hate." And within hours, news vans were swarming the neighborhood, turning our quiet streets into a national spectacle. Patricia, realizing the walls were closing in, tried one last desperate gambit from jail, instructing her lawyer to sue everyone. Me, Mrs. Sato, even my 16-year-old daughter, for conspiracy to defame. A move so delusional it would be funny if it wasn't so pathetic. She made bail, of course, because money talks, and immediately tried to flee, packing her car with cash and fake documents. But she forgot one crucial detail. My cable was still in her trunk, pinging her location every 5 seconds. They caught her 40 miles outside of town, a fugitive with a trunk full of evidence and a laptop containing the ethnic cleansing spreadsheets Mrs. Sato had predicted, detailed plans on who to harass next, projected profits from their misery, and emails to corrupt officials. A paper trail so damning it made Watergate look like a misunderstanding. The climax wasn't a fight, it was a collapse. Her empire of shell companies, false deeds, and intimidation crumbled under the weight of federal RICO charges, environmental fraud from the illegal dumping she'd been hiding, and massive civil rights violations. The sentencing hearing was the most cathartic moment of my life. Seeing Patricia in an orange jumpsuit, stripped of her expensive silks and her power, listening to the judge describe her actions as a stain on the fabric of democracy. She got 25 years, no parole, and every single asset was seized to pay restitution to the families she destroyed. Nearly $5 million funneled back into the community she tried to bleed dry. But the money wasn't the point. The point was looking over at the Kapoors, seeing them hold hands, safe in their home. Looking at Elena Gomez crying tears of relief, knowing her children wouldn't be homeless. We didn't just go back to normal, though. We built something better. The seized assets were used to install a massive solar canopy at the community center, free EV charging for everyone, a permanent monument to the victory of the many over the greed of the one. Maya used her experience to write an essay that got her a full ride to Harvard, and Mrs. Sato started a nonprofit to help other neighborhoods fight tyrannical HOAs, turning our nightmare into a blueprint for resistance. I still work on cars in my garage, but the air feels different now, lighter, cleaner, stripped of the static tension that used to hum in the background. Standing there today, plugging my Chevy Bolt into the very outlet that started this whole war, I can't help but think about the fragility of justice. We won because we had a perfect storm, a lawyer, an electrician, a journalist, and a data whiz. But how many Patricius are out there right now, stealing cables, stealing homes, and stealing dignity, with no one to stop them? It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Is the system designed to protect us? Or do we have to rewire it ourselves every single time it shorts out? That's the story of how a $300 cable brought down a multi-million-dollar criminal empire. I want to know what you think. Was Patricia a symptom of a broken system or just a bad apple? And have you ever had to fight a war just to live in peace in your own home? Let me know in the comments. And if you believe in standing your ground, hit that subscribe button, because the only way we keep the lights on is by looking out for each other. Stay grounded, everyone.